There's a disinformationist on the internet who says his name is Richard D. Hall, and he presents himself as an investigator of UFO and extraterrestrial activities. He is from England and has a platform called Rich Planet. I saw one of his lectures on YouTube called The Secret Space Fleet, where he discussed black triangle aircraft and how these black triangle aircraft were property of the United States government. And he used as a reference another disinformationist named Ed Fouché. Ed Fouché was supposedly an avionics engineer in the U.S. Air Force. He claims to have worked at Area 51 and also at General Dynamics at Fort Worth. So Rich Hall and Ed Fouché go out of their way to convince you that the black triangle aircraft are U.S. military aircraft, and they have been named the TR-3B. And while they describe the black triangle craft, both these guys will try to throw a lot of fancy technical phrases at you, such as plasma accelerator. They say the United States military has been working on these types of aircraft since the 1940s, with these hang glider shaped planes like the XB-35 and the YB-49. Fouché states these planes evolved through the years, and now the U.S. military has black triangle aircraft with plasma accelerators. And these planes are coated with quasi-crystals that not only block radar, yet allow these planes to change color, blending into the day or night sky. So they appear like black triangles at night and blue triangles during the day. Then Ed Fouché will try to tell you his next line. In fact, the U.S. military has had plasma accelerator engines in operation as early as the 1960s, and that these plasma engines spin ionized mercury gas so fast around in circles that it generates a magnetic field. In other words, these two nuts, Richard Hall and Ed Fouché, will try to convince you that the U.S. military has aircraft with zero-point energy capabilities. They describe them as plasma accelerator engines, which power these black triangular aircraft that people sometimes see. So if you see one of those black triangle craft up in the sky, they want you to think that Ed Fouché is behind the wheel. And if you believe all that, Richard Hall will also tell you the U.S. military are landing these triangle planes on the moon. They are flying them all around the solar system and then using them as bases on whatever planet they might land on. So let's stop there and come back from Richard's planet of disinformation. And I'd like to refer you to a real person and someone who will give you some real information on zero-point energy. And that is a man named David Sereda. And David has two excellent documentaries where he accomplishes more in the way of research than the entire NASA program, in my opinion. And those documentaries are entitled Evidence, The Case For Nasa UFOs. There's a part 1 and a part 2. In part 1, David analyzes the footage recorded by NASA that exposes the many UFOs ignored by NASA as they fumble around on their satellite. And in part 2, David goes into detail about zero-point energy. And zero-point energy will begin to explain to you how highly advanced spaceships can travel great distances throughout the universe very quickly. So I'd like to refer you to David Sereda, and he also has a website, but as you can see, I cannot access it. However, those two documentaries I highly recommend, and I'm sure his website is equally valuable too. Now, unfortunately, to learn a thing or two on how the government operates, we have to return to the topic of Ed Fouché and Richard Hall on their planet of disinformation. and see what we could expect from the CIA MI5 government crime ring. So these two clowns are here to tell you that the US government is so advanced and has everything running so well that as far back as the 1940s, they had these triangular airplanes. And if you look at the XB-35, it looks pretty advanced, especially for something out of the 40s. It looks like a stealth bomber with propellers. Yet if you look into the XB-35, they had many problems with the propellers and the engines. So they constructed a newer model, the YB-49, that had the same frame but was fitted with jet engines. However, it never made it into production because the YB-49 continued to have problems. They caught on fire, and there were other issues causing them to cancel the YB-49 design. So aerospace engineers decided to forget that design, and they began developing the more traditional jets with designs that we are more familiar with, until they decided to return to the arena of the triangular-shaped aircraft around the Carter and Reagan administration, when the military and large aerospace corporations began to work on the B-2 stealth bomber. So after looking into the development of the stealth aircraft, I found out that they have nothing but problems as well. So it wasn't as though the stealth aircraft design evolved into that specific shape as our technology and sophistication improved through the decades, but rather it seemed as though the military was trying to jump ahead of itself, like they did in the 40s, and imitate something that they have seen. So after these early prototype planes like the XB-35 and the YB-49 failed, they put that design on hold into the 1980s, when the military began to develop and test the B-2 stealth bomber. Basically, the B-2 stealth bomber was an aircraft that was able to fly at fast speeds, at high altitudes, and would be undetectable by radar because of its coating, which would absorb radar signals. And this aircraft would be used to nuke Russia. Yet the cost of the B-2 stealth bombers was an enormous amount of money and continued to go up and up and up because the military and their aerospace engineers encountered nothing but problems in the development of this stealth bomber aircraft, so they experienced many delays. I read that in 1997 the total cost of developing, engineering, and testing each stealth bomber was $2.1 billion. I also read for every 1 hour of flight time, the stealth bomber needed 119 hours of maintenance. Then, at the end of the 1980s, as the Cold War with Russia was almost at an end, Congress did not feel the need to purchase as many stealth bombers as it originally planned when they wanted to go nuke Russia. In 1988 was the first public showing of a B-2 stealth bomber. In 1990, the Department of Defense accused Northrop Corporation of using faulty parts in the flight control system, and they had to continue to redesign and test the aircraft, and it continued to be something of a money pit, where every day they were updating, changing, and then testing the aircraft. And this went on for decades. Then, after sinking countless of billions of dollars into the stealth bomber project, the aircraft continued to have more problems. In 2008, the military crashed a B-2 bomber shortly after takeoff, destroying the aircraft. In February of 2010, another serious incident involving a B-2 occurred at the Andersen Air Force Base, where the aircraft was severely damaged by fire while on the ground. The growing cost of the B-2 program and evidence of flaws in the aircraft's ability to avoid detection by radar were among the reasons that drove opposition to continue the program. And at the peak production period, specified in 1989, The schedule called for spending $8 billion a year in 1989 dollars, something that definitely would not fly financially. So after all the billions of dollars were spent, the military only used the B-2 stealth bomber for attacking tiny third world countries like Afghanistan and Iraq in a severe demonstration of overkill. So I'll encourage all of you to investigate this B-2 bomber, because it appears to be the closest thing to a black triangle aircraft that the military has. I'm having nothing but problems researching this craft. There's a lot of disinformation and confusing timelines that I find when I'm looking into it, but maybe some of you will have some better luck. But from my perspective, I basically see a history of a developmental aircraft design that was modeled after something else. In other words, it was as if the military was inspired to jump ahead of themselves and try to imitate a craft they had only seen in the skies, or seen photographs of, or possibly attained via a UFO crash site like in Germany and Roswell. Also, I would like to mention that because these stealth bomber aircrafts did not work so well, the military always had to return to a more traditional design of aircraft, for example the SR-71 or the Aurora.